Reading J.R. Majewski's article on how he was sabotaged by the NRCC motivated me to finally make my video on how to deal with the Republican Party. Rule number one is not to be a damn liar like Majewski was. The Republican Party has one goal. They want to get people out to vote so that candidates win elections. All the parties do it. They do mail, they knock on doors, they make phone calls. They do these things to help candidates win in the general election. Obama in 2008 had a goal. The Democratic Party needed to get 400,000 people registered to vote in Ohio, right? They had goals for every state, but we'll highlight Ohio. They met those goals and he won by a little over 400,000 votes. That was a success for the Democratic Party that year because they pooled their resources, they registered new voters, they overcame the challenge, and Obama won that year. A couple years before that, the Republican Party had set a goal of 200,000, and I think that may have been the goal in 2016 with voter registrations. That was the perfect example of how the Republican Party helps Republican candidates win. There's a tendency for people to vote the party they're affiliated with, and your messaging and your campaign is responsible for getting the votes from the people who are on the line or unsure. As a political candidate, you usually need to get through the primary process before you get support from the party committees. The Republican primary, just like the Democrat primaries usually, the primaries are a litmus test for political candidates. They're how you evaluate the strength of the candidate and their ability to organize and raise money and win an election. If the candidate can get through the primary on their own, then they probably have what it takes to get through the general election. This does not mean that the best candidate always wins. Oftentimes, the best, most experienced guy just has no support. Sometimes it happens. They can't pull a campaign together. And this is a process that has worked for us in the party for generations. This is the process. There are sometimes exceptions to the rule. Every now and again, people will rally behind a candidate here or there because they think they have a better chance of winning in the general. In Majewski's case, the NRCC had identified a candidate that they thought could get through the primary, and in his article, if you take the time to read that crap, you'll see that they had tried to help a state senator get through because she would have been polling better against another woman in this +5, +7 Republican district, one of the two. That's a good opportunity and a good exception for the party to get involved in making sure that they win the general election, but it's not common. A lot of times they want to wait, let the primary happen, and then decide where they want to throw their weight, unless you've got a candidate that's going to be a problem. Trump intervening in the primary process across the country is why we lost. And you can pretend it's Act Blue or some other crap. These are not why we lost. We lost because the primary election was interfered with, and the candidates with the best campaigns and the best messaging were thrown off by voters who just did whatever Trump said. This is very frustrating because as an organization, the Republican Party is a team. And I know Trump hasn't felt like a part of that team because so many people have worked against him. But if he would have sat down and not said anything until after the primary, the right candidates would have gotten through and everything would have probably fallen into place instead of having to butt heads. But Majewski butted heads with people in his local party because they didn't like him. He came out of nowhere. He was picked by Trump, who they already don't like. And on top of that, they had already picked out the candidate that they wanted to win. And so, unfortunately, he did win the primary, and it was the responsibility of the local party to get behind him, and they didn't. They were miffed that they were bypassed. We still live in the era of boss politics, as much as college professors and others will try to pretend that's not the case. And sometimes you can bypass party leadership and still get through a primary and a general election. But oftentimes you can't if they're really strong in their communities. And so when you go around the party to try to do your own thing, sometimes there's going to be consequences. And I'll talk about, I've actually got some, one of my favorite examples was Denver Riggleman. I worked for him in Virginia. And man, that guy, he just pissed off the party so much that they actually rigged the primary so that he wouldn't get reelected. The same Republicans, of course, who complained about Trump's election getting rigged, and then they, do the exact same thing. But that's another story. In fact, I'll have to make a video just about that. But anyway, the political party, when they get mad and they're well organized, they can turn against you. And that's what they did to Majewski. And his lies didn't help. So for him to go and bash the NRCC for not supporting him when he wasn't really worthy of that support is a bit frustrating to read, especially when all of it was so preventable. It was so preventable. If you get a DUI, right? You're drunk driving, maybe it was a party or whatever. You can usually overcome that with good messaging. You talk about it early. You explain your life. We're not perfect. None of us are. And when we talk about our lives, our successes, and our failures, we look more human, and that helps us in the long run. Majewski, for example, was a veteran, and he had come home from overseas, I think, before he got this DUI. My God, we have veterans committing suicide like there's no tomorrow after the trauma of having been overseas. The fact that he got caught drinking is not really a huge surprise. And the story of how he overcame his alcohol, I think, would have helped him to win. Instead, they decided to lie about it. So that's what happens when you don't have good people on your campaign to help you walk through things. They just help you to lie. That's a huge problem. Another problem that you have in a Majewski scenario is that you never want to be dependent on the party to continue to support you. Not because they're jerks and will just take away funding, but if they don't get the resources that they're expecting to get in the last 6 weeks of the election, they've got to make hard choices, and your race could get cut even if you're 2 points ahead. You just don't know. And that's why you want to appreciate any mail or media they want to do for you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Never plan on it. Never plan on it, because it can go away at any time. It can go away because you don't hire the consultant that they like. It can go away because you said something that they didn't like. It can go away because your polling numbers are low. You don't have the support that they thought you would have by this point. You didn't hit your fundraising targets to do matching. Or they just don't have the money to continue to supporting your race, and they had to make some tough choices, and they had to support these other candidates with a greater chance of winning. You never know. And party committees can sometimes be really fickle. Sometimes they'll push you out if they say, hey, if you're not going to run your campaign the way we say, then, and use these vendors, which is a corrupt problem that we have sometimes, then you're not going to get the money for your race. And that's what happens. That's what happens. And in his case, he was dishonest. He either lied to his staff or he had staff that sucked. Crisis communications can sometimes be a challenge, but you prevent that by taking situations like his and you talk about them early. So the idea that the Republican Party was involved in a massive nationwide conspiracy to make sure MAGA candidates lost is ridiculous. They've got people who expect them to win a certain number of races, and if they don't win the races, then those donors are going to be much less apt to give money in the long run. What I think is also terrible is the expectations in that particular race, or the idea somehow the Democrats were just better organized is ridiculous. We've been a party since Lincoln. There is an organization, there are county party structures throughout the country, but there's enough people that are active in campaigns. They know what they're doing. They're on the ground. They're volunteers. They're knocking on doors. They know their community, that if you're outmaneuvered, it's because you failed to connect with the people that you need, oftentimes on the local level. Majewski is a good example of that because the party committees turned against him. According to what he said, the parties turned against him and they started attacking him. It's kind of wrong because we're a team. We're supposed to run together. He won the primary, whatever. But the fact that happened is just an example of what happens when you fail to connect with your local party committees. You don't have to be best friends, but after the primary, you sit down and you have a conversation. Most of the candidates have a tendency to do that, and sometimes these party committees have to bite their tongues and support the guy because that's what we do, but that's what we do. And so it is disappointing to hear about his experience in that regard. In Ohio, our map is only going to be good till the next election, so everybody knows if they just wait, they can take that seat back later, and they don't need you, which is why it's so much more important to rub shoulders. So let's use what happened with Majewski as a case example as to why you need to be prepared to be on your own, because sometimes there's good reasons they cut you off, sometimes there's not. but you can't depend on them. And that's something that I've come to see, but you never know. You never know. And you need to be able to campaign and win without that extra support from the party. It's a test of your candidacy. You have to be able to get through the election on your own without that help. And I would tell any candidate I worked for, the party might be interested in you now, but that could change tomorrow, right? And there's a million reasons why they could drop you, not all of which are nefarious. I hope that you take this as a lesson in why you need to have your shit together, why you got to have a good campaign together, why you need to be a good and honest person, and if you're not perfect, that's a messaging situation that you could have easily taken care of way before you're in the middle of a campaign. Good luck.